It is the title of my message, and this first slide says, finally, we're here. We're at the end of the parables. Last week was an oops because I went a little too long, and so we didn't get to finish the parables. So finally, we're here. We made it to the end of the parables, and as we've been going through them, we've been realizing how they combat our natural us versus them thinking. We're good, they're bad. We saw in the parable of the four soils how we often think of, well, we're good soil, obviously, and look at them hardening their heart. Look at them with all the rocks. And we realize all the soils are in our own heart. Different times and different places, the word that comes from the kingdom to us at different moments can sometimes bounce off hard soil. It can encounter rocks. All the soils are in our own hearts. And then we saw with the wheat and the weeds, that the weeds are the things I do to trip up other people. The weeds are me when I do bad things. And we saw Peter exemplifies this. One moment he tells Jesus, "You're the Christ, you're the Son of God." And Jesus is like, "Yes, this is you, the child of the kingdom. You know this." And then the next moment, Peter says, "You're not going to the cross. What are you talking about?" And Jesus says, "Peter, this isn't you. This isn't you with the kingdom. This is now you with the seeds of Satan. And you would cause me to stumble with what you're saying." And so we see wheat and weeds in all of us. And we realize that this furnace of fire that is talked about is where we become purified. We lose the weeds out of our life. And so the next verse then says, then the righteous will shine because we become purified. So we've gone through that and we've seen how the parables combat this us versus them thinking, and we realize good and bad is in all of us. We've also realized how much the parables defy a clear and concise answer. They move us from trusting our own mastery to trusting the master, who we're meant to sit at the feet of. Part of the way that the parables defy answers is that they don't actually give us enough information to be answered definitively. So to claim a certain answer to a parable, I have to add information into it. Information that I'm not given. When I realize this and I stop and look at what I just did, when I stop and look at what I just added to the parable to reach my answer, I get a chance to learn deeply about myself as I consider what facts, what connections did I make and insert into the gaps of the parable to come to the answer that I thought was clear. We really find this particularly at play in our next two parables, that there's not enough information given to have a definitive answer. The first parable is of the hidden treasure in Matthew 13:44. It reads, "The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and reburied. Then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has, and he buys the field." The Greek word for treasure here, it indicates something that was stored up. So it's not like this man was out prospecting for gold and he stumbled across a vein of gold that nobody else had found. The word indicates that this treasure was stored by someone into a money box or something and was put there deliberately before this man found it. Somebody had hidden it there, and then this man found it. Apparently the treasure is unknown to the current field owner because the current field owner just sells the field. The current field owner seemingly doesn't take the treasure for themselves. But we don't even know that for sure. What if the field owner is the one who put the treasure there? What if the man in our parable buys the field and then goes to check on the treasure and finds it missing? Because the previous owner said, I've sold my field, I'm going to take my treasure with me. We don't know. But do you see how he put things into the parable to create a story? The things we put into the parable are often either our own assumptions or they can be assumptions we've been handed. The audience, though, first hearing this parable would have been left on the edge of their seats as we should be today. The original audience is left wondering, this man staked everything on this field for the treasure that was there. Is it still there? What was there? Jesus gives us no answer. I'm going to run today with the idea that the treasure was put there before the current owner in our parable, and the current owner of the field didn't know it was there. So the current owner sells the field to the man, and the treasure is still there. That's the common understanding of this parable. We'll run with it today. Okay, so the kingdom of heaven in this parable, is it only like the treasure? Or is the kingdom of heaven like the treasure in a field? So the kingdom is the combination of field and treasure. Or is the kingdom of heaven like this entire parable? In other words, you can't have the kingdom of heaven without all of this. A treasure, a field, a person who doesn't realize there's worth there, but a man who does know there's worth there. He knows there's worth that the field is built upon, and he gives everything to buy it. The field and the treasure. For now, we're going to run with the idea that only the hidden treasure in the field is the kingdom of heaven in this parable. So we have a man in a field who discovers or stumbles across the kingdom that was not in plain sight. This is something of great worth, apparently. So the man rehides the treasure where he found it. He goes and sells everything he has to buy the field that holds the treasure. And our parable ends there, but we're left with all kinds of questions. What the heck was this man doing in the middle of a field he didn't even own? We might think that he was working as a sower, out there hired to plant seed, to sow seed in preparation for growing season. He might have been a harvester, hired by the owner to help harvest the crops. But he seems a little wealthier than that because with all he owns, he has enough to buy the field. You wouldn't expect this of a poor field worker, especially given that land was typically not sold off. It was passed down through family. To convince someone to sell the land would have taken a high price. You would have to pay way above market value to get someone to depart with land, to separate from land that they had no intention of selling. Or was the land already for sale? We don't know. Did the man know there would be treasure in the field? But was he poking around to confirm it? Perhaps he was let in on a rumor that the person who owned the field before the current owner had buried a box, a money box of his valuables in this field, and then died. So the man in the parable, he's looking to confirm the rumor that there is treasure there. So he isn't shocked to find the treasure, but he is surprised. He's excited. Or was the treasure an utter shock to him? We know he wasn't doing the metal detector thing of today. So if the treasure was unexpected, are we to believe that this man just suffers from a compulsion to randomly dig holes in fields that he doesn't own? And are we to believe that out of acres and acres of land, his compulsive hole digging somehow strikes upon a treasure? We don't know. Now, the first time when he found the treasure, why didn't he take it with him that time? If he's worried about people seeing him carrying or stealing treasure in the daylight, but he obviously has no qualms about trespassing on other people's property and digging in it, why didn't he come back at night to get it? Then he would be able to add the value of the field's treasure to his own treasure, that whatever he's accumulated in life. He wouldn't have to sell all of this for this. He could have them both. He could have his cake and eat it too. If the treasure was too heavy to move by himself, why not recruit some friends to help at night? Or why not go back over a few nights and take a little bit at a time? There's all kinds of questions here. After the man bought the field, did he dig the treasure up and cash it in? It doesn't say. If the field cost everything that the man had before the treasure, does he buy the field, secure the treasure, and then sell the field to recover that expense because he really seemed to only care to buy the field for the treasure? Questions and questions stack up that we don't have information for. How am I to know how to take this parable? Am I the person who stumbles across the kingdom of heaven? And I'm meant to realize that it's worth giving up all I have in order to own it. I've heard this one before. But then what does the field represent that I am also buying along with the kingdom? What if the field is me? And this builds upon the other two field parables, where the fields are the hearts of every human being. What if I'm the field of soil that's in various states of suitability, and through my field is good wheat and bad weeds? And what if Jesus is the man who gives everything he has in order to buy me, the field, despite the mix of all the good and bad that's on the surface? Because Jesus knows that under my field is a thing of worth that I don't even realize. What if I'm starting to think from the first field parables that human worth is based upon how much good soil we have in our hearts and how much wheat there is? What if I've taken the first two field parables and I've started to think, okay, well, we all have wheat and weeds, we all have good and bad soil, so our worth is in how few weeds do I have? How much more better soil do I have than someone else? What if from the first field parables, I've come to the humility of realizing, okay, I'm like everybody else. We all have different kinds of soil. We all have wheat and weeds. So I'm kind of humbled. But I'm still judging others no longer for being entirely different than me, but for not being enough like me. In other words, I've admitted that we all have good and bad, but I'm still judging others for not having as much good as I do. I'm looking and considering how much less good soil do they have than me. I'm judging their rocks in their heart where mine have been cleared out. And I'm judging how much more weeds they have than I do. What if the first two parables talk about surface level dynamics that take place in every human being, but just in case I start to think that my worth is on the surface stuff? What if this parable indicates that no matter what's happening on the surface, the field's immense value is actually found in something deeper than the surface? In Luke, Jesus says that the kingdom of heaven is within us. So that would support this idea. The idea that Jesus buys the good and bad soil along with the good and bad plants growing in it because he knows what is actually deeply within me, the real me under the surface. Jesus buys my life because he knows there's a valuable thing buried in me, even when I, to this day, can struggle to see my own deep worth. More mind-blowing is that it is to the Pharisees that Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven is within you. Jesus tells the Pharisees that buried somewhere under the utterly crappy, weed-filled lives that he is dealing with them, there's a priceless treasure of the kingdom there. I leave you to consider where or how this line of wrestling strikes you, how it shapes you, as parables are meant to shape us. This doesn't have to be the answer. Jesus made it so that we can't know the answer, because then we get to explore all of the ideas and be worked on by all of them. So I leave you to weigh that one while we move on to the next one. On the heels of not having enough information in that parable, we come to the parable of the pearl in Matthew 13, 45 through 46. It says again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. On finding one pearl of great value, he, the merchant, went and sold all he had and bought it. Okay, so now the kingdom of heaven is the thing of value being bought? Like the treasure in the last one? Or is the kingdom of heaven the one doing the buying? Like it sounds like in this case. Is the kingdom the thing worth selling everything to secure? Or is the kingdom selling everything to secure the things of great worth? In this case, we'll read that the kingdom is the one selling everything, even if it's for only one thing of value. And then this parable may call to our mind a commonly used phrase through the New Testament. The phrase, how much more? So we might read here, we might read this as, if the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant who's willing to give up everything for one thing of great value, how much more will the kingdom give up everything for many things of great value? What if these two parables combine into a super parable, so to speak? And somehow the kingdom is the dynamic of this. It is something that is simultaneously of worth hidden underneath the field of every person, even the Pharisees. And what if the kingdom is the image of God enfleshing himself in Jesus to give it all up for the sake of the thing of worth in our fields? Along this line of thinking, the image of God does pop into my mind. Going back to Genesis, we believe that even in the people we consider to be the worst, there is buried within them somewhere an image of God. And then the image of God gives up everything to come down to earth for the sake of the image of God treasure buried in each of us. So what does this make the kingdom of God then? As I wrestle with this, the kingdom of God then is God and everything God does. The kingdom of God is God's image buried in us. The kingdom of God is God's image as himself, who came to be with us, Jesus, Emmanuel. And the kingdom of God is the act or the love to give up everything for the invaluable treasure of his image that's in each of us. Maybe? I leave you to think on that. And we go on with one more parable left. Up to this point, we can consider in the first parable, it is from the kingdom that the seed of a word is dropped onto my heart. In the second parable, it is by the kingdom that good things grow in me, and I will eventually be cleansed once and for all of the weeds of my life. It is the third parable. In the third parable, it is within the directions that the kingdom is choosing to grow that we are invited to find places of rest. In the fourth parable, it is due to the kingdom that humanity is changed. We're yeasted. In the fifth parable, it is something from the kingdom that is buried beneath the field of our lives that gives us great worth beyond just what is visible on the surface, even when I can't recognize my own worth. In the sixth parable, it is the someone from the kingdom who gives up all they have for the sake of what is very precious, even a pearl that grows within a hard, ugly creature. Now, as we go to the next parable, do you remember, or did you ever have those extra hard questions at the end of a college exam? Teachers would place these at the end of their tests. And maybe not everyone has experienced this, but I encountered it multiple times. And I remember it the worst in statistics class. There's different questions through the exam that cover my mastery of various independent concepts. But then there would be this final culminating question. Most often, and luckily for me, it was extra credit because it was the hardest question. It would be the hardest, trickiest one that would test my ability to put together all the concepts I should have learned. And very often it would even have a twist within it to try to throw me off a little bit. It was meant to trip me up. But it was solvable with everything that I had learned up to that point if I worked hard and I didn't get tripped up over any twist that it tried to throw in my way. That's how I take parable 7. As the 7th parable, this is the perfecting parable. 7 is used through the Bible as the number of perfection or completeness. Jesus is spoken of as having 7 eyes because he sees everything perfectly or completely. Just like when he saw through his disciples' attempt to pull the wool over his eyes and redirect him to the crowd and away from their own shortcomings. So as the 7th parable, the parable of the fishing net, it completes the series here. And I believe that it's chosen perfectly to let us see what we have learned from everything in the previous 6 parables. It gives us a chance to now take everything we've learned and apply it to a single parable. We'll walk through it. First, the parable. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea, and it caught fish of every kind. When it was full, they drew it ashore. They sat down and put the good into baskets, but threw out the bad. All right, so in this, Jesus says again, this means he's giving them another parable. The parable is this. The kingdom of heaven is like a fishing net, and it catches all kinds of fish. Okay, makes sense so far. In the Gospel of John, Jesus says that as he's lifted up on the cross, he will draw all people to himself. So we're getting that kind of imagery here, the drawing of all people. Now, who's the they in the parable that are doing the sorting of the fish? It's fishermen. It's humans. Humans are sorting fish into good and bad, wanted and unwanted. Let's keep going then. Now we come to the explanation or the answer to the parable. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Weeping and gnashing of teeth, we've seen this phrase a few times, and it speaks to an incredible emotional sense of mourning. In the Middle East, they mourn unlike what we do here in America. And it is deeply felt mourning. And what's the obvious reading here if we weren't carrying the lessons of the other parables? The reading that is common to the evangelical church goes something like this. See, the kingdom gathers good and bad people into it, and I, obviously the good person, must tolerate the obviously bad fish who are here with me. But they will get theirs at the final judgment. They will be separated from me. They will go into the furnace of fire, and they're going to feel bad. They're going to weep and gnash, and they're going to mourn as they watch me wave and walk away into heaven. I get to skate on by. And we all say in this answer, Jesus, you suck as a rabbi because this is so plain to see. Your parable isn't even a parable because it's so obvious. But by now, we should realize that the clear answer is suspect. Because it's the answer that makes the parable not even parabolic. So let's think a bit harder on this and put into practice everything we've learned up to this point. What have we learned up to this point? Well, we first realized that we should probably take the parables as a little more complex than the modern church gives them credit for. The parables were rabbinic tools that were meant to be difficult, to create conversation and often not even have an answer. Then we learned that even Jesus' supposed explanations of the parable is perhaps simply not just the clear answer of the parable. Earlier, the disciples, they asked for an answer to another parable. And Jesus says, sure, I'll give you the answer. Because I really don't want you to have to do the work that leads to wisdom. I'll give you the answer. No. Jesus gives them an answer. But then he makes the comment at the end of the answer that essentially means, I've given you words. And somewhere within those words is the answer. But it might not be what you think is obvious. You have to dig. Because I'm a good teacher. And I don't just give you the answers and handicap your maturing into wisdom. So, Jesus' explanations of the parables are not necessarily answers on their surface. Other than what lies on the surface when we first grab onto what we think is the answer, it does give us an answer about who we are. As we take the easy road and we grab the easy answer, the answer that commonly puts us in the good crowd. So we've learned these two things, that parables and Jesus' supposed answers to them are both more complicated than they may appear. And then we learn that the parables confront our human tendency to point to the wicked them, who is obviously not me, but the wicked them. On their surface, the parables reveal our initial jump to us seeing ourselves as good and seeing them as bad. So if this parable appears to easily invite us into us and them thinking, we at least need to be suspicious of the answer, because that hasn't been the answer to any other parable. Also, we've learned in the parables to be a little cautious of literalism, as if I literally have dirt growing in my heart right now, or wheat or weeds, or as if the kingdom is really a tree or yeast, or the kingdom of heaven is literally buried in a field somewhere on earth and we're meant to look for that literal field. Finally, for the purpose of today, we have learned that maybe some parables connect or build on each other. Due to time, I leave more work on the final parable in your hands, as I will leave you with a brief idea of how the seventh parable might be read when we carry forward the wisdom of the other six. To the places that it seeks to trap me in us versus them thinking, and I'm tempted to think good fish, bad fish, and start to judge others. I'm righteous, they're evil, and I get pulled into this. I've learned from the other parables to say, no. That's wrong for sure. Because as soon as I judge myself as the good fish, I'll prove myself to be the bad fish. I'll do something that shows there's a bad fish in me as well. Peter is our example of that. So I sidestep the twist in this parable that's an invitation to make this about us and them. And when I do that, the parable opens up to speak from God to me. And I hear, well done, Jason. You have discovered how things work. I know the treasure under the fields of people's lives, despite the weeds the rocks that you see in their fields or that you have in your own. I know the pearl growing in them and you, for which I'll give everything up. I already have. You will see all kinds of people being gathered into the kingdom, like all kinds of fish in a net. And you will want to judge them like fishermen judge fish. But if there is to be judging done, my parable says that it will be at the time that I choose. And it will be under the direct, plain work of my angelic host. It isn't to be done by Jason. You and other humans, go judge earthly things. Go fishing if you want to judge something, and then judge what fish you want to keep and what fish you don't. Judging fish is the job of humans. Judging humans is the job of me and my angels. It's not your job. But there's more to the test of this parable here. When angels separate the righteous from the evil, here's the question. Here's what I believe is the biggest test in this parable. Who goes into the fire of the furnace? I want to not be dealt with painfully. I want to skate through things and simply be righteous easily without painful work. So my knee-jerk reaction is that the ones that go into the fire of the furnace of the smelter are the evil ones. They burn forever. It mentions the evil and the righteous, and it says them. Which them is it? The concept that I learned a few parables back, though, is the idea that the smelter is the place where I get to be cleansed of all my junk that I want to be free of. The smelter is where my weeds are cleaned out. The smelter is the process by which my pollutants are cleared away and I come out and shine. The smelter is the place of processing. And if we're going to keep Jesus' analogy going along the lines of a fishing parable, which fish are the ones that go through processing and are put over a fire? The good ones. The good ones are the fish that get processed and get cooked. Do you see it? Part of me wants to read this parable as if pain and mourning is what the evil will experience. But having learned what the smelter symbolizes, it is the process to final freedom, the cleansing of everything out of me that pollutes me. Now a greater part of me says that when I'm unsure of who the them are, who are going to go through purification, I hope it's me. The parable of the wheat and the weeds lets me know that it is me. I will go into the smelter to be purified and come out shining. The parable of fishing nets lets me know that if I want to think of myself as the good fish, then I must know that it is me who will be processed, just like good fish. The kids are going to come back here in a second, but I don't know if this has blown your mind. It blew mine when I was led to read it this way. There's weeping and gnashing of teeth. There is deep mourning, not in hell, but in the process of my own purification. Because I will grieve for things I invested a lot of time and energy in to only then realize they were pollutants as I watched them burn away in the love of God. I will mourn for the pollutants that I didn't even realize were in me that were hurting all the loved ones around me. I will painfully be forced to watch some impurities be taken from me that I knew were impurities, but I wasn't ready to let go of yet. The purification process is now painful, and it isn't promised to be completely painless as it reaches a culminating point of freedom. I mean, if Jesus is equating the processing of us to the processing of fish, the processing of the fish kills them and cuts them up. But do you see now how we can speak of being slain and cut up by the sword that comes from Jesus' mouth as a good thing? There's so much that I love, but we don't have time today to go into it all. As we read the 7th parable today, it is a call to not judge or even worry about trying to figure out if there are even bad fish in the net with me. Rather, it is to let myself be completely pulled into the kingdom and anticipate the day that I will be called a good fish and qualified to go be processed into final freedom, cleaned of all my junk. I pray for the day that I am counted as the them who will go into the final processing of the smelter. We've already heard back on the Sermon on the Mount the call by Jesus not to judge. To the point I judge, I will be judged. So you better believe it is mercy, mercy, mercy to the best of my ability. If I'm going to be judged how I judged, I pray that it is mercy that I give every chance I get. And when I get to my final place of judgment, and the question is asked, how did he judge on earth? So we can judge him here appropriately. The angel looks at the entry of my life and he says, well, he judged with way too much mercy. And I get to say, all righty then, judge me with way too much mercy. As we come to communion and Nate comes up to close us with our last song, what is reassuring to me is that even when I fail to give mercy, there is someone whose mercy triumphs anyway. Because when he was judged mercilessly, he still expressed merciful forgiveness. His body was broken and his blood was spilled in what Scripture tells us was the ultimate show of mercy to the entire world. So as we close in worship, I'm going to invite you to take communion as you're ready. You can commune with Jesus, who says, even though you didn't realize the treasure of your own worth, hidden under the field of your life, forming like a pearl within a rough, ugly exterior, even though you didn't realize your own worth, I did. And I went on the cross to give everything, to buy the field, and to get the pearl. You can also commune with Jesus, who says, don't stress the them. If there's judging to do, I will do it at the right time, and I'll take care of it. Don't let the them distract you from me. Come away from the window of gazing at everyone else. Sit back at my table with me and let me carry you through to completion, freeing you from all the junk in your life. Come commune with me. I know your worth, and I will set you free.